The rain fell heavy that night. It came down in thick, heavy sheets over downtown Chicago, swallowing the streetlights whole and turning every headlight into a blurred smear of yellow. The kind of rain that didn't care about umbrellas or hoods or the fact that Ariana Cole had already worked 14 hours straight and her feet were screaming inside her heels. She stood at the edge of the hotel's revolving door, watching the storm like it was a personal insult. Her phone showed 2% battery. The rideshare app had already confirmed the pickup. Somewhere out there, a black SUV was waiting for her, and all she had to do was get to it before the world completely fell apart. She didn't wait for the doorman. She pushed through the doors and ran. The rain hit her like a wall of cold water. She ducked her head, crossed the slick pavement and saw it. A sleek black SUV idling at the curb, exactly where the app said it would be. She grabbed the handle, yanked the door open and threw herself inside before another second passed. The door slammed behind her. Warmth. Silence. The soft smell of leather and something else. Something darker and expensive that she couldn't name. Ariana exhaled. She shook the water from her hands and leaned her head back against the seat. She didn't look at the driver. She didn't check the license plate number she'd meant to verify. She didn't notice that the partition between the front and back seats was down, or that the man sitting less than 2 feet away from her was not a driver at all. She was asleep before the SUV even pulled away from the curb. Rafael Costello noticed everything. He noticed the exact moment the door opened. He noticed the small woman who dropped into the seat beside him like the car belonged to her. He noticed the way she shook the rain from her dark hair and pressed it back from her face with both hands. He noticed the exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes and the way her shoulders dropped the second the warmth of the vehicle wrapped around her. He also noticed that she hadn't looked at him once. His own driver glanced into the rearview mirror, waiting for an order. Rafael said nothing. His phone was already buzzing with encrypted messages from the men waiting for him 2 miles east. A meeting with the Degrave Syndicate's couriers that could not be rescheduled and could not be late. And yet, he looked at the woman sleeping against his shoulder. She hadn't even checked to see who he was. She had simply decided she was safe and closed her eyes. In Rafael Costello's world, no one made that decision around him. People watched him from across rooms. They chose their words carefully in his presence. Grown men went quiet when he walked into a space. Women who knew his name kept their distance. This woman didn't know his name. He was sleeping. He told his driver, quietly so he wouldn't wake her, to keep driving. The meeting would wait. For reasons Rafael could not explain and did not try to, he needed another few minutes to understand what in the world was happening inside this car. She woke up almost an hour later. The SUV was still moving. The rain outside had softened to a mist. The city lights had changed. They were somewhere she didn't recognize, somewhere quieter with wider streets and fewer people. Ariana sat up fast. She looked at the window. Then at the door. Then at her phone, which was completely dead. Then finally she turned and looked at the man sitting beside her. He was watching her already. Dark eyes. Sharp jaw. A stillness about him that felt less like patience and more like a predator who had already decided there was no rush. He wore a charcoal suit that had never seen a wrinkle. His hands rested in his lap, relaxed. He was not reaching for anything. He was simply looking at her the way people look at something they've been studying for a while. Any reasonable person would have gone quiet. Ariana opened her mouth. "Who are you?" Rafael blinked. Just once. "Who are you?" she asked again. "And why are you in my rideshare?" "This isn't your rideshare." The words landed flat and even, no anger behind them, no threat. Which somehow made them worse. Ariana looked at the door. Then at the partition. Then back at him. "I got into the wrong car." "Yes. You watched me get in." "I did. And you didn't say anything." He considered this for a moment, the way someone considers a question that has an answer they haven't decided to share yet. "No. I didn't." Ariana stared at him. Most people in this situation, trapped in a vehicle with a stranger who hadn't corrected their mistake, would have gone into full panic. She could feel the edges of panic somewhere far back behind her eyes. But in front of it was something sharper. Something that didn't appreciate being made a fool of, even accidentally. "Why were you parked outside that hotel?" "Business." "What kind of business?" "The kind that doesn't get discussed with strangers." She looked him over once. The rings on 2 of his fingers. Simple, heavy gold. The driver who hadn't said a single word. The way the city outside seemed to part around this car like it already knew to move. Tell me your name, she said. Pause. Then, barely just at the edges of his mouth, something that wasn't quite a smile. Raphael. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was smart. Then she turned to the window and said calmly, I need to go home, Raphael. He told the driver to take her home. He walked her to the door of her building himself, stepping out into the mist without any visible concern for the weather or the late hour or anything at all. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at her. Next time, he said, check whose car you're getting into. Ariana looked back at him from the top step. Next time, correct the stranger before she falls asleep. She went inside. And for the first time in longer than Raphael could remember, he stood on a sidewalk not knowing exactly what to do next. 3 days later, the black SUV was parked outside her office building. Ariana stopped on the sidewalk and stared at it. She had convinced herself in the days between that the whole thing had been a fluke. A strange, unsettling night that belonged to the category of stories she'd tell someday but never repeat. She had not expected a follow-up. The door opened. Raphael stepped out looking exactly as he had 3 nights ago, like time didn't touch him the way it touched everyone else. You investigated me, she said before he could speak. He didn't deny it. I know where you work. I know you support your younger brother. I know your mother was sick for 2 years and that you turned down a promotion to be closer to her. He said it the way someone reads a list. Not cruelly but precisely, which was somehow worse. I know you're talented at what you do and that your current employer pays you about 60% of what you're worth. The air between them went still. That's a significant invasion of my privacy. Yes. I should call the police. You should, he agreed. You won't. He hated that he was right. She crossed her arms. What do you want? To offer you a job. He held out a card. Just a name, a number, nothing else. I manage a number of private events and VIP operations. High-end, high-security, complex logistics. You're qualified. The salary would change your life. She didn't take the card. What kind of organization? He looked at her steadily. Not an entirely legal one. The honesty surprised her more than any lie would have. But your work would be legal, he continued. Completely. No illegal tasks. No exposure to anything you don't choose to see. And you would be protected. Completely. Protected by who? By me. She stared at him for a long time. She thought about her brother's tuition payment due in 3 weeks. She thought about her mother's remaining medical bills. She thought about the promotion she hadn't taken and the raise her company had quietly decided she didn't deserve. She took the card. She told herself she was only considering it. She knew she had already decided. The Costello estate sat beyond the city like a secret the skyline was keeping. Ariana was driven through iron gates and down a private road lined with trees that blocked everything from view. When the car stopped, she stepped out and stood in front of a house that wasn't really a house. It was a statement. Stone and glass and perfectly maintained grounds, the kind of place that whispered old money but meant something else entirely. Inside, the first person who found her was not Raphael. It was a small woman in her 60s with sharp dark eyes and silver hair pulled back with the kind of confidence usually reserved for people who have outlasted everyone who ever doubted them. You must be the girl who fell asleep in my son's car, Lucia Costello said, looking Ariana over with an expression that was equal parts amusement and evaluation. I prefer to think of it as a rideshare misunderstanding, Ariana said. Lucia's eyes sharpened. Then she laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one. I like you already. Come. I'll show you the kitchen before Raphael turns this into a formal briefing. Ariana followed her, and somewhere in the distance she heard Raphael's voice giving instructions to someone she couldn't see, and she thought, this is either the best decision I've ever made or the worst. She would spend months not knowing which. Matteo appeared by lunch, Raphael's younger cousin, who walked into rooms like he was expecting applause and grinned at Ariana like they'd known each other for years. You're the one who actually talked back to him, Matteo said, dropping into a chair. In the car. I heard about it. I asked who he was. Nobody asks who he is. They already know and they're already scared. He leaned forward. You weren't scared. I was exhausted. Even better. Matteo laughed. I think you might be the most interesting thing to walk through those gates in years. He wasn't wrong. Ariana watched and she listened and she worked, and in those first weeks she learned the shape of Rafael Costello's empire the way you learn the layout of a building. Not all at once but room by room, door by door, until the whole structure started to make sense. She learned which meetings she wasn't invited to. She learned which names made the household staff go quiet. She learned the locations of things she was told never to ask about. And she learned, slowly and without meaning to, the pieces of Rafael that didn't match the reputation. She found the receipts one evening, not hidden exactly, just filed among other documents in a cabinet she needed access to for an upcoming event. Hospital invoices for 3 different employees' family members. All paid in full. All marked with a handwritten note that said anonymous donor in Rafael's handwriting. She found the name of a women's shelter on a recurring transfer she stumbled across while reviewing financial records. The donation was substantial. Monthly. Had been going for years. She put the papers back exactly where she found them. She told herself it didn't change anything. But it did. The night of the gala changed everything. Ariana had organized it herself. A private event in a hotel ballroom on the 42nd floor, 120 guests, flawless in every detail. She stood at the edge of the room watching it unfold and felt the quiet pride of something built exactly right. She didn't notice the men near the service entrance. Nobody did until it was too late. The first sound was wrong. Not a crash, not a shout, just a sharp, flat noise that didn't belong in a room full of quiet music and crystal glasses. Then the chaos arrived all at once, and the room stopped being a gala and started being something else entirely. Rafael was at her side before she understood what was happening. His hand found her arm and he pulled her, not dragged, but moved her with the kind of force that had no room for argument, through a door at the back of the room she hadn't known was there. Down a corridor. Downstairs she hadn't known existed. Through tunnels beneath the hotel that smelled like stone and old air. He didn't let go of her arm the entire time. He gave commands as they moved, short, sharp, quiet, and men appeared from places she hadn't seen them standing, which meant they had been there all along, which meant this world was layered in ways she was only beginning to understand. When they finally stopped, in a room somewhere below the city, Ariana's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She turned to look at Rafael. She had seen him composed. Unreadable. She had seen him warm once or twice, in the specific way that warmth appears in people who have spent years suppressing it. She had not seen this. He was giving orders with a coldness that had no bottom to it. His eyes had gone to a place that was pure function. No emotion, no hesitation, just calculation and command. He moved like someone who had rehearsed crisis so many times it had become a language he was fluent in. The men around him responded like instruments being played. Terrified her. Not because she thought he would hurt her, but because she understood for the first time the full weight of what he was. Not the rumors. Not the stories. Not the whispered name in other people's mouths. The real thing. Later, when it was over and they were back at the estate and the night had gone quiet, Ariana found him standing alone in the study. She walked in without knocking. "How many people," she said, "have lost their lives because of the world you built?" He stood with his back to her for a moment. Then he turned. She expected the wall to go up. The composure. The deflection. The careful distance he kept between himself and questions that could reach him. Instead she saw something flicker in his eyes that she had no word for, something slow and heavy and deeply tired. He didn't answer. But she saw the guilt. And that scared her more than the coldness had. The underworld has its own kind of news cycle, and within 48 hours, every family in Chicago knew the same thing. Rafael Costello had put his body between himself and danger to protect a woman. In this world that was not romantic. That was a target. She became one. Rafael doubled her security the next morning. 2 men outside her office door. 1 on her floor at the estate. A car that followed her everywhere she went, even to the building's small rooftop garden she visited when she needed air. Ariana hated it. She hated the shadow of it, the loss of the simple, ordinary freedom of moving through the world without being watched. She hated that she'd walked into this willingly and was only now feeling the walls. She hated that she had to hate it quietly because every time she brought it up, Rafael looked at her with something that was 3 parts frustration and 1 part something more complicated. "You can't follow me everywhere," she told him one evening, the argument rising before either of them had decided to have it. "I am not a package you're responsible for delivering safely." You were followed twice this week, he said. I have photographs. Then deal with the people following me. Don't put me in a cage. It's not a cage. It feels like one. Feeling like something and being something are different. His jaw tightened. I need you to be safe. You need control, she shot back. There's a difference. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room completely, not empty but full, pressing against both of them. He looked at her and she looked at him, and the argument was still technically happening, but neither of them was fighting anymore, not really, and they both knew it, and that was somehow the most dangerous part. She went to bed angry. She lay in the dark and listened to the estate settle around her and told herself the anger was the only thing she was feeling. She didn't believe herself. She left on a Tuesday. She told herself it was simple. Her brother needed her, it had been weeks since she'd seen him, and she was a grown woman who could make her own decisions. She told one of the lower-level staff she was stepping out. She slipped out through a side entrance before anyone could follow. For exactly 45 minutes, Ariana felt free. Then the van appeared. It came from a side street, fast and deliberate, and there were men inside who moved with the particular efficiency of people who had planned this in advance. She didn't get a chance to run. She didn't get a chance to scream. There was a hand over her mouth and darkness, and then nothing. When she came back to herself, she was in a room with no windows and a single light overhead. Her hands were bound. The air smelled like rust and water. Somewhere distant, she could hear the sound of a harbor. She breathed. Slowly, deliberately, the way she breathed before managing a crisis at work. Because this was a crisis, just a different kind, and panic would not solve it. She started counting the sounds she could hear. She started mapping the space by feel. She started thinking. Far across the city in the Costello estate, Raphael received a message. It was a recording. Her face. Her voice telling him she was unharmed. And then a man's voice, calm and pleased with himself, delivering the terms. Trade your empire. Or lose the girl. The room went very quiet after he watched it. Then he stood up. What happened in the 48 hours that followed was the kind of thing that becomes legend in cities that run on power and fear. Warehouses in 3 districts went dark. Safe houses that had operated quietly for years were suddenly, without warning, not safe. Men who had information and thought silence would protect them discovered they were wrong. Raphael Costello moved through those 2 days like a force of weather. Relentless, everywhere, unstoppable. He didn't sleep. He barely spoke unless the words mattered. He burned through every resource, called in every debt, turned every stone in a city that suddenly understood what it looked like when a man stopped calculating consequences. Matteo, who had seen a lot, said nothing for most of it. Lucia lit a candle in her room and prayed. The city watched. The shipping dock was quiet at 3 in the morning. Ariana was still counting. Still breathing. Still thinking. She had worked out the rough dimensions of the room she was in. She had located 2 exits by sound. She had also worked out that the man guarding her door was not one of the more focused ones. He had been on his phone for the past hour, and his footsteps when he walked followed a pattern. She was working on what to do about this when the sounds outside changed. Not the guard's phone. Not the water against the dock. Something else. Something that moved differently, with the kind of precision that doesn't make noise until it decides to. The door opened. Raphael stood in the frame. He was not composed. She could see that clearly even across the dim room. The set of his shoulders, the controlled rage in every line of his face, the way he looked at her like he was checking a list of injuries and not finding the end of it. He crossed to her in 4 steps and his hands went to her wrists, checking the binding there first before anything else, and that detail, the fact that his first instinct was to check if she'd been hurt, broke something open in her chest that she hadn't known was locked. The man who had been holding her at gunpoint was not an obstacle for more than 3 seconds. Then Raphael pulled her up and into his arms, and he held her with the kind of force that doesn't know what to do with relief when it's been running on fury for 2 straight days. He felt him shake. Just once. A single tremor through his whole body that he was trying to control and couldn't. Against her hair, his voice came out rough and quiet. You are the only thing they can use against me. She didn't say anything. She pressed her hands against his back and held on and felt the truth of it. Not as a burden, not as a danger, but as a fact about where she had arrived without realizing she was walking there. He was not in his world anymore. He was part of it. She spent the following week at the estate, not because anyone asked her to, but because leaving felt like a conversation she wasn't ready to have yet. Tea every morning without being asked. Mateo told terrible jokes at dinner until she laughed against her will. The estate was the same as it had always been, enormous and layered and full of things she still didn't know, but it felt different now. Smaller in the way that places feel smaller once you know them. Raphael sat with her on the third evening. Just sat in the chairs on the east terrace that faced away from the city. They didn't talk for a long time. Then he told her about his father. He told it without drama, in the same flat, measured way he told everything. But she could hear what was underneath it, the way you hear a current under still water if you're quiet enough. His father had built the empire the way empires in this world were always built. With violence and patience and a total willingness to treat human lives as currency. Raphael had grown up inside it. He hadn't chosen it. By the time he was old enough to understand what he was living inside, it was the only structure he knew. Then when he was 24, almost everyone was taken from him in a single night. He had rebuilt what remained. Not because he wanted power. Because the people left alive needed someone who could protect them and he was the only one standing. Every brutal thing I did after that, he said looking out at the dark grounds, I did so that there wouldn't be another night like that one. And did it work? Mostly. But it cost you something. He turned to look at her. Everything. She looked back at him. The man in the car on that rainy night. The one who hadn't corrected her mistake, who had let her sleep against his shoulder like she belonged there, who had been curious for the first time in years. He was still in there. Under all the layers. Under the empire and the reputation and the damage that running it had done to him. She had known for weeks what she was feeling. She had been arguing with herself about it at the same volume she argued with everything she wasn't ready to deal with. She stopped arguing. She fell in love with him quietly in the way that things that are inevitable tend to happen. Not as a surprise but as a recognition. The collapse came from inside. Not from the Degrave syndicate. Not from the federal investigation that had been quietly building around the edges of the Costello organization for months. From inside, which was always worse because inside meant trust and broken trust leaves a kind of wreckage that bullets can't make. Raphael came to her with the financial documents spread across his desk, his face doing the controlled thing it did when he was working very hard not to show what he was actually thinking. Something is wrong, he said. The accounts don't match. Someone inside has been feeding information and moving money, but I can't trace it without starting a war that will burn everything down. Ariana sat down across from him and looked at the documents. She had spent 12 years managing elite corporate events. She had sat across the table from CEOs and diplomats and people who treated money as a weapon. She knew what financial manipulation looked like. The signature of it, the small inconsistencies that compounded over time, the way someone careful could hide a trail until the trail got comfortable. Give me 24 hours, she said. He gave her 72 because he trusted her and because somewhere along the way he had learned that her instincts were worth following. She did it in 18. The trail led to a man named Carver, one of Raphael's longest-serving advisors, a man who had been present at every major decision for the past 9 years and had used that access like a key, quietly unlocking everything he needed to build a pipeline straight to the Degrave syndicate. Ariana laid it out on paper. Every transaction. Every timestamp. Every communication she could trace without access to systems she wasn't supposed to know about. She built a case the way she built an event schedule. Detail by detail, nothing left to chance. Every piece supporting every other piece until the whole thing was airtight. She handed it to Raphael on a Wednesday morning. He stood across from her and read every page and didn't speak for a long time. When he finally looked up, his expression was something she hadn't seen on him before. Not gratitude, that was too small a word. Not surprise, because some part of him had already known she was capable of this. Something closer to the look a person gets when they realize they have been underestimating someone who had been patient enough to let them. You stopped a war, he said. I reorganized a spreadsheet, she said. His mouth moved. Almost a smile. Almost. You could have walked away from any of this, he said. At any point. You had reasons. I had reasons to stay too. Even knowing what I am. She held his gaze without flinching. I know what you are. I also know who you are. Those are different things. The enemies were still at the gates. The investigation was still circling. The Degrave syndicate had absorbed the exposure of Carver and recalibrated. They were smarter than most, which made them more dangerous than most. Raphael came to her on a Friday night and sat across from her and said the thing she had not expected. "I can dismantle it," he said. "The criminal operations. I've been building the legal side for years. It's large enough now to stand on its own. It would take time. There would be risks. But I could walk away from the other half." She looked at him. "That's everything your family built," she said. "It's everything my father built. I made it survive. That's different." He looked at his hands for a moment. "I'm tired of what it costs. And if you do this, what happens to the people who depend on the organization? The legal side employs most of them already. The ones it doesn't, I'll make sure are taken care of." He paused. "I've been planning this longer than you know." She understood then that this wasn't a decision he'd made in the past few weeks. It was a decision he'd been circling for years, waiting for something, or someone, to tip the balance. "I'm offering you a choice," he said. "Stay and help me build what comes next. Or leave with me, disappear somewhere quiet where none of this follows." She thought of the empire. The weight of it. The power inside those walls. She thought of Lucia and Matteo and the employees who had been quietly protected for years. She thought of what it would mean to stand inside all of that, legally, as something real. Then she thought of the man in front of her who was willing to burn down everything his name stood for because something had shifted inside him, and she was part of what had shifted it. "I don't care about the empire," she said. "I care about the man willing to destroy it for me." Raphael went very still. For a moment he simply looked at her, like someone seeing the exact thing they had stopped believing existed. Then he breathed. And for the first time in his life, Raphael Costello made a choice that had nothing to do with power. The charity masquerade gala was held on a Friday in late October. Black tie. Candlelit. A gilded room full of Chicago's most powerful people, many of whom had spent the past year watching the Costello situation the way you watch a thunderstorm. From inside, behind glass, hoping it doesn't reach you. They had no idea what the evening actually was. Ariana had planned it, which meant it was perfect. The kind of seamless elegance that made people feel safe. But underneath the champagne and the orchestral music and the masked faces, Raphael had laid a different kind of architecture entirely. The evidence Ariana had built, expanded in the weeks since, verified through channels that required people to call in favors they'd been holding for years, moved quietly from hand to hand during that evening. To the right federal agents. To the specific journalists who could not be bought. To the internal affairs offices of 3 different departments. It arrived in the right hands at the right moment, documented and irrefutable. The Degrave Syndicate's leadership was removed from the evening in handcuffs at 9:30. Carver was taken from his own home at 10. The remaining lieutenants of the organizations that had been circling the Costello empire like wolves scattered before midnight, because the evidence exposed them to and a cornered rat runs always. The party went on. Ariana stood at the edge of the room watching it happen and felt the same quiet pride she'd felt at the very first gala. The feeling of something built exactly right down to every last detail. Raphael found her after. He stood beside her and they looked out at the room together. "No massacre," she said. "You told me there was a better way. I told you there was a smarter way. Same thing with you." She looked up at him. He looked down at her. Around them, the evening moved and sparkled and the world rearranged itself into something new, the way worlds do when a sufficient amount of force is applied in exactly the right place. Months passed. The Costello estate became quieter in the way that places become quieter when the weight they've been carrying is set down. Lucia added a garden to the east side. Matteo enrolled, improbably, in a finance program and called Ariana twice a week to complain about it. Raphael converted the organization. Not overnight, not without difficulty, not without the kind of work that required starting before dawn and finishing after dark, into something that could stand in full light. It took time. It took people willing to make the transition alongside him. It took a level of patience that would have been impossible for the version of Raphael who had existed 12 months ago. That version was not entirely gone. He was still watchful. Still controlled. Still the person who read every room the moment he walked into it and saw the exit before he saw the furniture. But something had changed in his center of gravity. Ariana noticed it in small ways. The way he slept sometimes without waking at 3 a.m. The way he laughed. A real laugh, not the polite performance of one, at something Matteo said at dinner. The way he reached for her hand in the car sometimes without seeming to decide to. She opened her company in the spring. Cole Event Group. Luxury events, high-end private functions, the kind of complex, layered productions that required someone who could manage logistics and people in crisis with equal calm. The funding appeared quietly, sourced through a series of entirely legal investment channels that Ariana didn't need to trace to know their origin. She built it the way she built everything, carefully, completely, with the kind of precision that doesn't leave room for failure. It was busy from the first month. She worked long hours. Good hours. The kind that fill you up rather than drain you. She hired people she liked. She solved problems that interested her. She built something that was entirely and only hers. And every evening when she stepped out of the building and onto the sidewalk, a black SUV was waiting at the curb. The same model. The same color. The same quiet patience at the edge of the street. Ariana would stop on the bottom step and reach into her bag. She would pull out her phone, fully charged always, and open the license plate she had photographed 2 days after everything ended and saved under a contact name that made Mateo howl with laughter every time he saw it. He would check the plate. It always matched. She would walk down the last 2 steps and pull the door open and get inside, and Raphael would be there, and the city would be doing whatever the city was doing, raining or glowing or rushing past in all its noise and light, and none of it mattered because she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had entered the wrong car on a rainy night and found the right life. She would not have changed a single wrong turn. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story.